My name is Craig Bailey. I am the CEO and founder of TSL Canada. It truly is an honor and a pleasure to be with you here today. I would like to extend thanks to Stephanie and really all the women at the Women's Entrepreneur Club of Saskatchewan for your interest in the supply chain. I've been in the supply chain now for 43 years. And it's hard to believe, 43 years, but I spent first 23 years with Canadian Pacific Railway. And then from there, I was a divisional vice president for Yankee Trucking here in Saskatchewan. And then in 2002, launched TSL Canada under a shareholders agreement with the parent company in New Zealand. Given that I'm speaking to a bunch of incredible entrepreneurial women, I also want to highlight that TSL is also driven by a number of incredible women. They run our operations both globally and within North America. They provide what I think is some of the best customer service out there. And Nancy Bailey, who is my wife, is the chief financial officer of the company and is an equal shareholder with me in the business. Again, it's such a pleasure to speak to women entrepreneurs. We have so many across Saskatchewan. You know, before I recorded this today, I spent some time on each one of your websites, just reviewing and researching. And I mean, I tell you, I was just blown away by the scope of each one of the businesses, the passion that is put into each one of these businesses. And I would like to say congratulations to each and every one of you for following your dreams and for creating just some really incredible businesses based in Saskatchewan. Now, Stephanie provided me with some questions that you would like me to speak on, and we're going to do that. And I appreciate you asking me those questions because at the end of the day, I want this video to provide you with some insights, provide you with some tools to help you manage and grow your business. So let's look at the questions. So one of the questions that was asked was, how is the supply chain affecting small business? I guess the answer to that is yes, it is affecting the small business, and we'll touch on that and talk about what's happening. What are the challenges and opportunities right now? That is a great question. You know, because even though there's lots of challenges, I still believe that in those challenges, there are opportunities. It's during the tough times when we can make some steps towards improving and capturing when things are better. The impact of COVID and predictions for the next few years. Now, this is a bit of a tougher question to answer. You know, as I'm recording this on Monday, March the 14th, you know, I wake up this morning to the news that Shenzhen, which is a city in southern China, I'm not exactly sure, 25, 35 million people in the city, has gone into a hard lockdown. That is a place where we draw a lot of goods out of. A lot of construction materials come out of Shenzhen, cabinets and countertops, et cetera, et cetera. So, the factories are closed. They're closed for at least this week. Thankfully, the port in Shenzhen is still open. This is probably in the top 3 ports in the world for volume. So it closed last summer, and the chaos that it caused in the supply chain was significant. So that's a bit of a challenge to speak to the future. In addition, I'm keeping my eye on what's happening with Canadian Pacific Railway. So they've been in negotiations with the Teamsters now for quite a bit, and they've gotten almost the way to the end, but there's one big stumbling block, and that is the pension plan. So over this pension plan, they're stuck, and they've had an arbitrator in there, but rumor has it that tomorrow, March the 15th, that CP may lock out the engineers. Now, the engineers are those guys that run the railway. They are the ones that drive the trains effectively. So without engineers, we don't have a railway. I cannot tell you the impact that is going to cause in supply chains. It is going to set us back months and months relative to recovery. I mean, we're just crawling out of recovery right now, and this is gonna, if that happens tomorrow, it's gonna knock us all the way back, and we'll have to start this process of recovery all over again. And then shipping and receiving for cross-border. You know, we do a significant amount of cross-border shipping, and so we've seen the dramatic change that has happened over the last number of years. And so we're going to talk about some strategies for shipping cross-border. And then negotiating flexible supplier contracts. That is tough in this environment, in the environment where the volumes are high. So we've got volume high, capacity low. So in that environment, it's tough to negotiate flexible contracts. So those are the questions, and I'm really thankful that you asked them. But I'd like to step back first before we get into that specifics and talk about sort of some higher level issues that are happening right now. So 4 key things that are happening right now. We want to talk about the warehousing. We want to talk about the ports and the port congestion. We want to talk about trucking in general, and then we want to talk about the railroads in general and what's happening. And that'll sort of give you a sense of where the supply chain is right now. And I also want to apologize. You know, I wish that I could come on and tell you about all the good things that are happening and how it's all going to be sunshine and roses. Unfortunately, right now, we're not in the sunshine and roses stage right now. We are slogging through the muck, if you will. So let me talk about these 4 higher level issues. Let's talk about ports and port congestion. You know, as I have traveled around the globe, you know, I've talked to various people. We talk about shipping and we have agents everywhere. Unfortunately, our port system within Canada does not have a great reputation. It has a reputation for the ports going on strike. It has a reputation for drivers going on strike. It has a reputation for slow working. So it doesn't have a quality reputation out there. So right now, the ports are feeling a ton of congestion. I'm sure that you all heard about LA and the Port of LA and the 100+ ships that were out in the harbor in LA, and the Biden administration getting involved and creating an agreement to run the port 24/7 to relieve some of the congestion. And unfortunately, there's still congestion, and there's congestion in the ports of Vancouver. You know, so, and congestion happens for 2 primary reasons. Obviously, volume. I mean, you know, there's a significant amount of volume. But the supply chain. The supply chain relies on flow of freight. Let me say that again. The supply chain relies on flow of freight. When there are disconnects in the supply chain, when freight is not flowing, when aspects of the supply chain are causing freight to stall, if you will, it has impacts throughout the supply chain. There's an action can happen 5,000 miles away that's going to affect us here in North America. So we have vessels around the globe getting delayed and not arriving in Canada on their scheduled time. So why is that important that they arrive on their scheduled berthing time? Because if they miss that berthing time, another ship's in there being unloaded when they should have been in there unloading. And then ships back up. And then they can't get to the ships. And then everything starts congesting back up through the line. Then you get what happened in LA. 100+ ships out in the harbor. We had 35, 40 ships out in the harbor. You know, when I went to Vancouver, it looked like D-Day, just the number of vessels that were out in the harbor. So that's one aspect. So we got the volume coming in staggered ways, if you will. And then the railway. I mean, the railway is responsible to supply rail cars for the port to load, for shipments to go to Toronto and go to Montreal, down to Chicago, down the east coast of the USA. So they need to supply those rail cars for the containers to be loaded on those cars and be hauled by the train. We had the washout last summer, and that ground to a halt. There were no rail cars to supply. The railways are still digging out of that incident, the washouts. They're still trying to comprehend, because as you had these washouts happening, you had this backlog of freight building in Vancouver, this backlog of freight building in the east, and the trains weren't cycling. Again, supply chain relies on the flow of freight. So we got this congestion happening in the Port of Vancouver. So that there's this real problem with our port system and the congestion, and there's a reason for that. And we're going to talk about that in the next couple of points. Warehousing. So the steamship lines last year, early 2021, ran out of equipment in Asia. They literally ran out of equipment. So the steamship lines scrambled and pushed what's called a transload. So transloading has been going on for a long time. That's where containers come into the Port of Vancouver, 40 foots and 20 foots come into the Port of Vancouver. They're unloaded at a warehouse and they're reloaded into 53-foot containers. Either the railway owns those 53s or they're a private asset 53-foot. So they're loaded into those 53s, put on the train, and railed to Toronto, Montreal. All the big retailers transload. Canadian Tire, Home Depot, Princess Auto, Walmart, they all have big transload operations. They also send a lot of containers to Toronto, Montreal. They do both. The steamship lines came to those retailers as well as everybody else in the marketplace and said, we want you to transload even more 40 foots because we need to get those empties, put them back on ships, and send them back to Asia for loading again for the head haul. So the transloading within Vancouver, the operation just exploded. So that put a whole lot more freight right into that BC marketplace, causing trucking shortages because trucking companies did not want to travel to Calgary. They didn't want to take our loads. They didn't want to take our loads to Calgary or Winnipeg. So the transload volume exploded. Washouts happened. Now they can't get empty equipment. They can't put it on the train. So now there's a backlog. So now the warehousing just starts getting piled up with freight. Just gets filled up for weeks and weeks and weeks to the point where they couldn't unload any more containers in the warehouses. They were just chock-a-block full. We had some transload opportunities that we couldn't find a warehouse that would do it for us. So, I mean, the warehouses were full. There was no empties. Now, when we talk about empty equipment, again, I'm going to say something here. No decision happens in isolation. You can't make a decision and it just stays isolated there. Every decision within the supply chain will have a ripple effect through that supply chain. So the decision to increase transloading to get empties back to Asia, okay, great idea. We get more empties back to Asia. But in Calgary, now I built the Calgary Intermodal Facility for CP Rail, and then I managed that facility for 2 years. On the weekends, it was not uncommon for us to load up a few hundred empty containers, same with Edmonton, and send all those empties back to Toronto, Montreal for the demand in Eastern Canada to load and send back to Western Canada. Well, those empties stopped moving to Toronto, Montreal. They started moving to Vancouver to support the transload program. Then they would move from Vancouver to Toronto, Montreal loaded. The problem was the warehouses in Toronto, Montreal were full. They could not unload the containers. I know of one courier company, I won't say who it is, but I know of one courier company who is paying one of the railways over $50,000 a month for holding on to railway equipment. So what's the impact of that? The impact of that is, as of this morning, I have 60 loads sitting in Toronto and Montreal that I can't get equipment for because 95% of CP's assets are sitting under load. So that's a huge problem when we talk about warehousing. The congestion in the warehouse system ripples right back through the whole supply chain. And then the trucking side. We know that there's been challenges in the trucking side forever. At Yankee, we struggled recruiting drivers. We ultimately went to the United Kingdom, the UK, to recruit drivers. And then we went to Ukraine and recruited Ukrainian drivers to come in. So we know there's always been a shortage in the trucking side. The challenge now is, combined with the shortage in the trucking side, you've got this massive bubble of volume. You've got warehouses that are full. And then underneath all of that people do not see, is a shortage of parts because of the supply chain. So when I was at Yankee, we had a maintenance facility in Saskatchewan. We had a maintenance facility in Winnipeg. We had a maintenance facility in Toronto. At any given time, you're going to find 30 pieces of equipment, either in the yard waiting for maintenance or in the facility being maintained so that they can get back on the road. Well, the shortage of parts is causing equipment not to be able to be put back in use, whether that's containers, trailers, chassis. So beyond the shortage of drivers, we've got the trifecta happening here. We've got a growth in volume. We have a shortage in drivers that we've always had, but now we're starting to see the trend of reduced rolling stock. That's equipment within the trucking industry. So those three things combined to each other are creating a real perfect storm. And so when we have freight to move, we have freight sitting right now on a dock in Chicago that needs to go to Yorkton, Saskatchewan. It's been there now for 2 weeks. And we were told this morning that, sorry, we don't have an idea when it's going to go. Our dock is full, and we're not sure. We can't give you a date of when that will be loaded onto a trailer. So the trucking side is under tremendous pressure right now. Now the railway. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because we talked about the railway through everything. But they're really struggling. And one of the things they're really struggling with is the changing of freight flows. Besides the washouts, and I mean, those things happen, they wreak havoc. We've had a very cold winter this year. That wreaks havoc on trains because you have to reduce your train lengths. But besides all that, the changing freight flows have really challenged the railways. So traditionally, the head haul has always been from Eastern Canada to Western Canada. So more volume, Eastern Canada moving to Western Canada than Western Canada moving to Eastern Canada. However, with transloading, it's flipping. So we're seeing more volume coming from Western Canada into Eastern Canada. And that volume coming in Eastern Canada, I believe that Eastern Canada is not equipped to handle that level of inbound loads in railway equipment. So if it's coming in a marine box, they can unload it, bring it back to an empty depot. They can hold that marine box in their yard and nobody's going to have too much of a concern because that marine box can sit there. There's lots of marine containers around. Not so right now. So when a 53-foot comes in, they can't unload it, causes all kinds of issues. Like I said, I have 60 loads in Toronto right now that I cannot load because I can't get equipment from the railways. So it's a bit of a doom and gloom picture, and I apologize for that, but it is the reality that really myself and my staff and all logistics companies are dealing with today. It's a really challenging system out there right now, and so I want to be brutally honest with you as we talk about these things. So now that I've gotten everybody depressed, get up and grab yourself a cup of coffee, and we can then talk about your questions and maybe give you some strategies and light at the end of the tunnel. So how is supply chain issues affecting small business? I think small business is probably being affected more so by supply chain issues than any other piece of business. You know, large companies have the capacity to flex. They have the cash flow to mitigate issues. They can pay for extra services. They can overpay for extra services to buy capacity. They have the ability to go and buy that capacity in the marketplace because, you know, they're fairly wealthy. They have a, you know, solid, they're big, they're large, they have lots of money. Us in the small business sector, and that's a sector that we service all the time, there's not all this cash lying around that we can just spend on buying capacity up. So I believe that the small businesses today are being affected by the supply chain more than ever. You know, on average, when we talk about small businesses, and I don't know if you ship on the full truckload side, I'm not sure if you're shipping on courier, I'm not sure if you're shipping LTL, but I'm going to make the assumption that most of you are either shipping courier or you're shipping LTL volumes. You know, the challenge again for small business is moving freight via LTL or courier. Courier being the most expensive. So again, you're paying the highest rates for service that's going the wrong way. It's going down, it's not going up. But if you're shipping LTL, you know that on an LTL shipment, that pallet, that product is going to get touched between 5 and 10 times, depending on direction and destination. And when I say touched, I mean it's going to be picked up by a truck, so touch 1. It's going to go back to a dock, touch 2. It's going to get loaded onto another truck, touch 3. It's going to go to another dock, touch 4, and then it's going to go to your final customer, touch 5. And that's in the perfect scenario. You know, many LTL trucking companies use what is called interline carriers. So they don't service Tuktoyaktuk, but they know that Rogers Trucking will service that point. So they take the freight to a certain destination and they hand that freight over to Rogers Trucking. And then Rogers Trucking delivers it. And that's in the best case scenario. We had a shipment out of Saskatoon going to the Kootenays in Lower BC. That freight went through 10 different trucking companies. Yes, you heard me correct. 10 different trucking companies. Nobody knew where that freight was because so many hands had touched it. That freight was probably handled at least 25 times. It did eventually get delivered a month and a half after we gave it to the trucking company. But it's an example of what happens to small businesses. You know, our freight volumes are not high enough to leverage anything. And the carriers, you know, are more concerned about the guy that's giving them 40 pallets a day versus, you know, ABC companies. So yeah, small businesses are really affected by supply chain issues. Today more than ever, though, I want to talk about some things that we need to do as small business owners. Today more than ever, you need to really be strategic, I guess, about who you're tendering your freight to. And what I mean by that is that you need to ask some questions. So it's no longer that you just pick up the phone, call ABC Trucking Company and give them the freight and everything's good. So now, critical questions to ask. Do you service this point directly or are you using an interline carrier? If you're using an interline carrier, can I get the name of that interline carrier? Most times they will not give you the name of that interline carrier because they want to keep that to themselves, right? How many interline carriers are you planning on using for this shipment? They may not give you the answer to that, but you got to ask the question. What is the expected transit time? So in today's world, I believe, and what we're seeing, is you need to add 30 days to the expected transit time. So if their transit schedule says that they are 10 days to a certain point, they're going to be 40 days to that point. That's what you have to factor in. And so when you're dealing with your buyer, if you will, factor that in. You know, one of the things that we talk about is building, and you'll hear this a little bit from me too, is building resilient supply chains. So, you know, again, don't pick up the phone and call ABC carrier. Pick up the phone, call ABC, CDE, EFG, HIJ carrier. Call 4 carriers. You know, that's what we do. We call multiple carriers. And, you know, over the years, we've developed, you know, a database that says ABC carrier is better in this lane and CDF carrier is better in this lane. Challenges are all pretty bad right now because of the volumes and everything. But it is important that you spend the energy to ask those questions and call multiple carriers. Unfortunately, Saskatchewan, we are not serviced the way that we should be serviced. We're really underserviced in this province. But call the carriers that are out there. And again, I'm gonna talk a little bit later about some other strategies that we can employ. So, what are the challenges and the opportunities right now? Well, you know what? I think I've spent a lot of time on what the challenges are right now. You know, we've talked about warehousing, we've talked about rail and trucking, we've talked about LTL. So let me spend some time more on the opportunity side than on the challenges side, okay? So it was interesting. I had to spend a lot of time thinking about this and trying to think about what the opportunities are right now for small to medium enterprises. And started thinking about some of the things that we're doing and what's the impact of that. You know, as I said, I looked at your websites and you have such a wide variety of products, a wide variety of scope of products. So these are sort of larger strategies rather than like micro for each one of your businesses. But what I can tell you is I think there's an opportunity right now to get a leg up on your competition. However, it's going to take an investment. And that opportunity right now is that there's an investment to improving, redesigning, creating resilience in your supply chain. I don't know who your competitors are out in the marketplace, but for sure they're facing the same issues you're facing. There's not a single company out in the marketplace that is not faced with these issues, that's not faced with supply chain challenges, whether it be inputs coming in or outputs going to clients. They're all facing the same challenges. I know on the input side coming in, many of the people that we're dealing with, we're working with them and they're working to try and find alternate suppliers. I think what this crisis has taught us is that having a single source out of a single country may not be the best strategy. And that I need to have, you know, instead of ordering 1,000 pounds from one person or whatever it is, I spread that out and order from multiple suppliers as long as the quality is there, to create that resilient supply chain that if one goes down, I have another opportunity out there. You know, when the supply chain is firing on all cylinders, it's relatively simple. You know, it's not that difficult. You know, we have a saying at TSL when people ask us what we do, we say we take the complicated and we make it simple. And that's because we operate in all areas of the supply chain. We operate both internationally, domestically, on the railway. We have a warehouse in Vancouver. We've just opened up a transload fertilizer distribution center in Regina. So we play in all areas of the supply chain. And so, and some are more complicated than others. But relatively, if the supply chain, if the freight is flowing, I keep going back to that, it's a relatively simple process to tender freight and it moves. Today, to create that resilient supply chain, you need to take and almost do what you do a process map, right? So you map your processes out. Where are the disconnects in our supply chain? What can we do better? What are some of the strategies that we can do? And I think that if you invest the time in breaking down your supply chains, both inputs and outputs, that will give you a leg up on competition. Not only will it give you a leg up on competition, however, I believe that will then allow you to look at new markets. Because once I've done the exercise of supply chain and building supply chain resilience, entering a new market shouldn't be scary anymore, because I know how to map out a supply chain to go into that market. So when we talk about what the opportunities are right now, the opportunities are under crisis, under chaos, under the challenges that we're faced. Take the time to look at your supply chains. One thing I think is the biggest opportunity is to redesign your supply chains. Look at everything, understand it. Now I believe the people that invest the energy, time, and money into redesigning and creating a resilient supply chain, going to be way ahead of everybody else. What is the impact of COVID and the predictions for the next few years? That's a big question. I'm sure we all know somebody who has been impacted by COVID. I've had COVID myself. In fact, I had COVID maybe 2 weeks after I spoke with Stephanie, and it sort of knocked me down for a few days. Unfortunately, I'm vaccinated, but yeah, it knocked me down. But yeah, so I had COVID, and I'm, like I said, I'm glad I'm vaccinated. So we know that there's some real challenges there. You know, COVID did a couple of things, and I believe it's going to continue to do a few things. COVID changed purchasing patterns, right? So we talk about the service industry and the hard good industry. So, you know, COVID, you know, whether it was going out to a restaurant, whether it was taking an airplane, going to a resort, whether it was going to see grandma, whether it was going to restaurants, all of that during COVID got shut down effectively. And so people started purchasing online. They had disposable income, and they started buying goods from Amazon and Alibaba and all the other online retailers. They just started consuming goods that way. That's a huge result in freight volumes. That's a big driver of the freight volumes we're seeing today. You know, people are not going to malls, they're buying online. And I believe that is going to continue to be a trend. You know, old guys like myself who never bought anything online, I started buying stuff online, which was very different for me. I mean, I've always wanted to touch and feel and try the sweater on and but I went to buying stuff online, and now I'll probably continue to buy things online. So that's changed. So when I talk about that growing, I think over the next few years, that those organizations like yourself, the small to medium, another opportunity is growing your online presence. I'm not great at that as TSL. You know, a lot of my work has been done on face-to-face relationships and growing that way, and a lot of organic growth based on word of mouth. So for me, I'm not the online expert, but particularly if you're selling goods into a marketplace, you know, online orders, you know, those companies that have those really kick-ass websites that people can go on and get a sense and a feel for the product. I think COVID's changed, and there's going to be opportunities to continue to grow, but grow through online orders. The other thing that I see over the next horizon, we talk about predictions. And again, it's really hard because, like I said, you know, when I first started recording this, there wasn't a war in Ukraine. Now today there's a war in Ukraine, and we really haven't even seen the impact that that's going to have on the supply chains. We haven't seen it yet, but there's definitely going to be some challenges on supply chains due to what's happening in Ukraine. One thing I am keeping an eye on a little bit too is vessels and vessel capacity and crew availability. You know, behind the scenes, what we don't see on big container ships are the crews that run the ships, the crews that man the ships and bring the freight from wherever to wherever. Well, when COVID hit, those crews, some of them, were locked on those vessels for 150 days, 175 days. They couldn't go home. They weren't cycling crews off the ships. The crews were isolated on those ships. Many crews are manned by Filipinos. Well, when they got a chance to go home, they didn't come back because they did not want to get stuck back on the vessel for another 145 days. They went home and stayed with family, and family might have been impacted by COVID. So crew levels are a real concern for me, because if we're going to grow capacity, if we're going to add more containers, if we're going to add more vessels, we're going to need more crews. So, and then the other concern is COVID, obviously, right? So what happens if COVID breaks out on a ship and that gets delayed? So in the background over the next few years, and I'm thinking 2 to 3 years, we're gonna struggle with capacity. We're gonna struggle with volume. We're going to struggle with crews, and it's going to take a while for us to crawl our way out of this. And unfortunately, I'm not seeing positive signs that we're moving forward right now. I almost feel like we're moving sideways, with the potential to go forward, but also the potential to take a step back. And that in itself is kind of worrisome for me. In North America, I'm really concerned about the railways. The railways' capability to balance freight flows. You know, I spoke with the senior management at CP, who are friends of mine, and they're ordering new equipment, but it's been the old chasing the tail with the railways, and I hate to say that because I did that when I was the railway in talking to customers, and they're doing it also. In that we're bringing more assets on, so everything will be okay. Yeah, but freight volumes grow, so you're not okay. Yeah, we'll bring more assets on, we'll be okay. No, freight volumes grow, you're not okay. So they're never ahead of anything. They're always chasing the market, if you will. So the volumes are here, we add more equipment, the volumes go here, and it's never ahead. So I'm always concerned about the railways, having spent 23 years there. And then on the trucking side, the supply chain issues relative to parts and supply and equipment, and we need the supply chain to get fixed so that we have proper, so that we can manage on the trucking side, fix the equipment, get the equipment up and running. But again, for the next few years, I see a couple of things: the continued battle with COVID, the continued volume that is surging through the networks as people still going to order more and more online, the lack of capacity in warehouses, and maybe it's not a lack of capacity because nobody anticipated this much volume would be pushing through the warehouses, but certainly there's a lack of capacity in both the warehouses, the docks, the trucking docks, and the workers, skilled workers. It's very difficult to find workers that want to work in the logistics industry. It's considered a blue collar industry, and so there's not a high interest in working in logistics, being running a forklift or working in a dispatch, doing those kind of jobs. Really difficult and big learning curves. I mean, it's an investment of at least a year to 2 years with an employee to get them up to where you need them to be on the logistics side. So if you ask me what the trends are over the next few years, I still think that we're battling COVID, we're battling capacity issues, and we're battling for staff. Those are the major issues that I think over the next few years, and it's going to take a number of years for us to right this ship. Just like that Evergreen vessel that was stuck in the Suez Canal. Took a while to turn that ship and dig it out. It's going to take a while for us to dig this out. But if we're, like I said, we're moving sideways. If we don't go forward, if we go backwards, that's just going to delay the process. So I'm going back to predictions again because I saw my notes and I missed one thought. People are, I know many companies, both large and small, are looking at their inventory and the way they manage their inventory. Just in time doesn't work anymore. There is no such thing as just in time shipping. It worked when freight moved through the supply chain. There's too many disruptions in the supply chain to have a just-in-time inventory. So I think what we're going to see over the next few years again is people, and I don't know if your companies will be doing this also, are going to reassess what they need in their supply chains, what they need in their warehouse, what they need from an order perspective. You know, I used to place an order once a month with this supplier. Now I'm placing an order 3 times a month with him so that I'm ensuring I have a steady flow. I used to only use one supplier to bring my hoses in. Now I'm using 3 suppliers to bring my hoses in. So I think what we're going to see over the next few years is a broadening of suppliers on the purchasing side from organizations, and we're going to see larger inventories in stock because like I said, there is no predictability to the supply chain. And so we're going to see those inventories and we're going to see people reassessing their supply chain, trying to create resilience in their supply chain. So that's what I believe is going to happen over the next few years. Shipping and receiving cross-border. You know, you've heard the theme throughout this presentation has really been one of time and volume and capacity. So no different than shipping cross-border. So when you're shipping cross-border, like I said, you need that a month. You know, my notes actually say 3 weeks. And then talking to the staff this morning, they're saying a month now to add to any transit times that the trucking companies are looking at. Now, I want to talk about a bit of a strategy here that we've utilized with some other clients, not to the degree I think that we should have, or clients should have taken advantage of. And we are looking at another client right now to employ this strategy. I just had a talk with them last week or the week before, I can't remember. So this client wants to open up distribution into the US Northeast and into Quebec. And so they were looking at finding 3 warehouses, one in the US Northeast, one in Toronto, and one in Quebec. And so after consulting with them, they agreed, and I agreed with them that really what you need is a warehouse in Toronto and do the distribution from that single source location. So why am I talking about this? Well, if you have a market that is in that U.S. Northeast area, so let's say Buffalo, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, in that area, and Quebec, and that instead of shipping single products all the time, and again, not knowing when you're shipping them out of Saskatoon, when they will actually arrive, there's an opportunity, I believe, and it depends on how many SKUs you have, but there's an opportunity to ship pallet loads into a facility in Eastern Canada. I'm suggesting Toronto. And then from Toronto, you can ship orders from there to the U.S. Northeast, from there to Quebec. And what you've done is you've pre-placed SKUs, if you will, closer to your market. Because I personally think the closer that your product is to the market, the more that you take out the variables. You know, if you're shipping from Saskatoon to Virginia, you know, you might have that then move from Saskatoon to Winnipeg, from Winnipeg to Chicago, from Chicago to, you know, a hub in Buffalo, from Buffalo down to Virginia. If you're shipping it out of Toronto, you're probably going straight from Toronto to Buffalo, I would say that, and then Buffalo to Virginia on a line haul truck. So you've moved your product closer to your market. Same exists for Western Canada if you're going into the U.S. there, or you're doing distribution within Vancouver. I do know of a few companies that do that, and they've hired people that help them with the distribution in those locations. But I think that you want to be able to, particularly shipping cross-border, you want to be able to get your product as close to your buyers as possible, and do it in such a way that you're not shipping single orders out all the time, if you can avoid that, but you're pre-placing a bunch of product in a warehouse close to your end users. And if they're close enough, the end user, the end buyer can come to the warehouse and just pick up from the dock. So again, eliminating some of the variables within the supply chain. Shipping cross-border, again, ask for routings. Ask how you're going to handle my shipment. How many docks is it going to cross? All of those are critically important to you managing that cross-border. And I don't know if there's any customs issues that people are facing on the cross-border side. We use George H. Young. They have an office in Canada and the US. They are fantastic as brokers. Never had an issue with them. We probably have 200 clients working with George H. Young. If the importer of record is going to be the individual in the U.S., just make sure you gather the right information so that you can properly document and send the documentation to the right people, and ensure that the carrier gets the right documentation also. Shipping cross-border has become a lot more complicated. And again, that's because of the freight is not moving through the supply chain smoothly. Negotiating flexible rates. I wanted to wrap up this presentation on a high note, but I don't know how to do it with this question. It has never been more challenging to negotiate rates than it is today. There was a time where you could, there's two factors, right? I could commit volume, which would give me a rate that was better in the marketplace, or I could commit steady volume too. Like, maybe not, I don't have a shipment of 75 pallets, but I've got a shipment of 5 pallets every single week, like clockwork, and then I can negotiate on those rates. Today, if you went to a trucking company and said, hey, I've got 3 truckloads, what's the rate? They would go, don't really want it. I'm full. I have no capacity. So it's exceedingly tough to negotiate flexible freight rates. I think what we need to do is negotiate with multiple carriers, because not all carrier rates are going to be the same. So we just had a carrier send us 2 new surcharges today. One of them was called a commerce surcharge. I have no idea what that even is. So I need to go and ask what that is. Now, they're the only carrier that are charging this. So again, if we don't ask what your surcharges are, we're going to be ending up paying something more than what we expected to pay. So again, it's important to check the box on multiple carriers to see what their rates are. We have an ocean line that we deal with that is charging a $300 US port congestion surcharge. However, they're the only steamship line that is charging that. No other steamship line is charging the port congestion surcharge. So again, when we're doing the rate comparisons, I've got to know all the surcharges. So again, I can't do that if I'm only phoning one carrier. We know this environment is not going to last forever. We know that there's a great saying, the market will find its equilibrium. Nothing lasts forever. And now is the time for us to take this as an opportunity to really tear apart our supply chains, to look closely at our inputs and our outputs. We got to really think outside the box. We have to think at a very different level when it comes to our logistics. Logistics used to be at the end of the table. Logistics was always at the kids' table. Never at the grown-up table. Well, now logistics is moving to the grown-up table because logistics is so important. People are realizing that if I can't get it to move, I really don't have a product. So I'm excited when I look at each one of your businesses. I think that you've really crafted some amazing companies and amazing organizations. And I wanted to say, I'm always open to a phone call also. I don't charge for that. Will gladly talk to any company, particularly based in Saskatchewan, about logistics and about opportunities and about the challenges and about maybe some strategies that are particular to your organization. Stephanie has all my contact details. So if anybody wanted to reach out to me and have a chat, I'm wide open for that. Again, I wanted to thank you for the opportunity. I wanted to thank you for your time. I realize I have gone really long with this, and I apologize, but it's just really hard to talk about logistics and not talk about all the issues that are happening today. So again, thank you. Have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye-bye.